You got a call sign, sweetheart? Or did they let you carry the clipboard?" The young man said it loud, so the whole end of the bar would hear, and the whole end of the bar did. He stood with one boot up on the rail and a beer sweating in his fist, turned half away from the woman so that the words were really for the 4 men behind him. They laughed on cue. That was the point of them. The woman did not look up. She sat at the dark end of the bar, where the light from the neon sign did not reach. A plain blue shirt buttoned to the second button, a single glass of water in front of her that she had not touched. Her hands lay flat on the wood. She had chosen the stool that put her back to the wall and her eyes on the door, and she had chosen it without thinking, the way some people choose to breathe. The bar was called the Holdfast, and it sat a mile outside the gate of the Naval Special Warfare base, close enough that the men who drank there walked in still smelling of salt and cordite and sunscreen. Tonight it was full of one team, loud and easy and certain. A team on liberty the night before a change of command. They owned the place. They always owned the place. The young man with the beer owned it most of all, because he had decided that he did, and nobody at his back had told him otherwise. His name was Trevor Kane, Special Warfare Operator First Class, and he was 27 years old and very good at a job that had not yet asked him for the only thing it would one day take. He had a hard, clean jaw and the kind of confidence that has never been corrected. When the woman did not rise to him, he leaned closer. "I'm talking to you," he said. "The clipboard, the badge. You're the new contractor, right? Safety, readiness, whatever they call it now." He grinned for his friends. "You wandered into the wrong bar, ma'am. This is a frogman's house." The woman lifted her water, drank a small amount, set it down exactly where it had been. The ring of moisture matched the old ring beneath it. "I'll keep that in mind," she said. Her voice was low and even, and entirely without heat, and it landed in the noise of the bar and disappeared, and Kane took the disappearance for a victory. He turned back to his men and said something that made them laugh again, and the woman returned her gaze to the door, patient as a stone in a riverbed. Behind the bar, the man drying glasses stopped drying. His name was Silas Webb, and he was 63, and he had tended this bar for 19 years and frogged for the teams for 20 before that, back when the rubber boats were heavier and the swims were longer, and the men who came home did not always come home whole. He had retired a Master Chief. He had buried more friends than he could name in one breath. And in 19 years of pulling beer for young men who thought they had invented courage, he had learned to read the one thing that could not be faked, the thing that had nothing to do with muscle or noise. He looked at the woman at the end of his bar, and he saw it. She sat the way a round sits in a chamber, without moving, and without any doubt about what it was for. Her stillness was not the stillness of a person who is frightened and trying to be small. It was the stillness of a person who has already counted every exit, weighed every man in the room, and decided that none of it required her to hurry. Webb had seen that stillness perhaps a dozen times in his life. Every time, it had belonged to someone the rest of the room should have been afraid of. He set the glass down slowly. Kane was telling a story now, a story about himself, the way the young tell stories, and his friends were leaning in. The woman was not part of it anymore. She had been a prop, used and discarded, and she let herself be discarded without the smallest flicker of complaint. She watched the door. She watched the room in the long mirror behind the bottles, without seeming to watch anything at all. Once, when a man near the pool table dropped a rack of balls and the crack went off like a shot, every head in the bar turned toward the noise. Hers did not. Her eyes had already gone to the door, to the only place a real threat would come from, and then come back, all in the time it took the others to flinch. Webb saw that, too. He drew a beer nobody had ordered and stood holding it, looking at the back of the blue shirt, and a cold and certain feeling began to climb up the inside of his ribs. The way the tide comes into a cut you have swum 100 times and always underestimated. He did not know her face, but he knew that stillness. He had spent his whole life around the few people who carried it, and he had learned, the hard way, that the loudest man in any room was never one of them. His hand paused on the tap. He had seen that stillness before, a long time ago, in men who never raised their voices, and not one of them had ever needed to. The woman drank her water. The team laughed, and the night, which everyone in the holdfast believed they understood, had not yet begun. Kane was not a cruel man, only an unfinished one, and unfinished men cannot leave a thing alone. He came back down the bar within 10 minutes, drawn by the woman's calm the way a boy is drawn to poke at a fire that will not flare. He set his beer down beside her water with a click and leaned an elbow on the wood. "All right," he said, friendly now, performing friendliness. "I'll bite. What is that?" He pointed at her collar, at the small, dark pin fixed there, subdued and worn, no bigger than a thumbnail. "Because that looks like a trident, and you're not wearing it like a costume, which is what's bugging me. So what is it? Gift shop? Boyfriends? You buy it at the base exchange to fit in?" The woman looked at him then, fully, for the first time. Her eyes were a pale gray, and they did not move around his face the way most people's eyes move. They simply rested on him and held. "It isn't a trident," she said. "Look again." Kane looked. He was close enough now to see that the pin was not the eagle and trident and flintlock every man in this bar had bled for. It was smaller, plainer, 2 crossed shapes beneath a single star, the kind of thing that meant nothing to a man who had never had reason to learn it and everything to a man who had. He did not know it. That bothered him more than he would have admitted, so he covered the not knowing the way the young always do. "It's a costume pin," he announced to the room. "She doesn't even know what it is." "I know exactly what it is," the woman said, and she said it so quietly that only Kane and the bartender heard, and she turned back to her water. Down the bar, Silas Webb set a beer in front of a chief he had not been asked to serve, and did not take his eyes off her. He had heard the correction. More than the words, he had heard the way she said the word trident. The flat, exact, unbothered way a person says a word they have earned and stopped needing to prove. He had said hundreds of words that way himself, a long time ago. He had heard old frogmen say them. You did not learn that cadence in a gift shop. He pulled a rag along a clean part of the bar, slow, thinking. Hoyt drifted over. Special Warfare Operator 2nd Class. Dalton Hoyt, 24, the kind of young man who experienced his own life, mostly through the small, glowing rectangle in his hand. He had his phone up now, angled at the woman, narrating under his breath for whoever would watch later. "We got a situation at the holdfast," Hoyt murmured to the lens, grinning. "Mystery lady, won't talk. Real operator energy." He laughed at his own joke. The woman's gaze flicked once to the phone, registered it, dismissed it, and returned to the door. She did not ask him to stop. She did not cover her face. She simply allowed herself to be filmed the way a mountain allows itself to be photographed, indifferent to the framing. The boy filmed a woman he could not read, the way a man photographs a cliff edge he has mistaken for a painted wall. She had done the math on every person in the bar already. The bartender who kept watching her. Old, careful, the only one who mattered. The exits, 2 of them, one behind the bar that the staff used. The young man with the pin question and the harder edge underneath the grin, who was working up to something and did not know it yet. The boy with the phone, harmless, a follower. The rest, a team, loose and happy and entirely unaware that the woman they were ignoring would be reading their names off a roster before the sun was fully up tomorrow. She felt no anger about it. That surprised people when they learned the truth of her later, that there had been no anger in her, not even at the end. Anger was a thing you spent. She had learned a long time ago on a roof, in the dark, with a man dying in her lap, exactly how little of herself she had to spend, and she had never wasted any of it since. So she sat. She watched the door. She waited for the man she knew was coming, because she had told him where she would be. Silas Webb wiped the same clean spot on the bar twice, and then a third time, and made a decision he had not made in a great many years. He reached under the register for the old phone, the one with the numbers worn off the keys, and he stepped back toward the kitchen door, where the noise was thinner, and he began, with a thick finger, to dial a man he had not called since a funeral. The mockery, by then, had become a sport. It happened the way these things happen, by accretion, each man adding a little, none of them deciding to be cruel, all of them deciding to be funny. Someone gave her a nickname. The Major, they called her, because of the way she sat, because it sounded right, because it was a way of pretending the joke was on her and not on their own unease. Someone raised a glass. "To the Major," Kane said, and the bar laughed and drank, and the woman watched it all in the mirror with the patience of a tide. There is a thing that happens in a crowd of young men when one of them decides on a target, and it is older than any uniform. The cruelty does not belong to any single one of them. It is passed around like a bottle, each man taking a small pull and handing it on, so that no one drinks it all and no one feels the weight of it. A joke here, a laugh there, a nickname that nobody invented and everybody repeated. The woman had seen it 100 times, in 100 rooms, on 100 objectives, and she understood it for exactly what it was. Not hatred, which at least has a spine, but the simple animal comfort of a pack that has agreed on who is outside it. She did not take it personally. She had stopped taking that kind of thing personally on a roof a long time ago, where she had learned that the men shooting at her did not hate her either. They simply had not yet met the version of the night that would teach them better. Neither had these boys. The night was young, and it had a great deal to teach. One of the older chiefs near the back, a man with a face like weathered teak, had stopped laughing 2 rounds ago. He could not have said why. He watched the woman in the mirror the way Webb watched her, and a small frown had begun to gather between his brows, and he set his beer down without finishing it. Kane, warming, hooked his boot around the leg of her stool and pulled. It was a small thing. He moved her perhaps an inch, a shove dressed up as an accident, the kind of thing a man can do to a woman in a crowded bar and call horseplay. She rode it without a ripple. The untouched water did not so much as tremble. Without seeming to think about it, she lifted her glass off the rail and set it on the flat of the bar, out of the path of a spill, a small, economical motion that nobody but Webb understood, the reflex of a person who has learned to secure the loose gear before the boat takes a wave. "Easy," Kane said, mock gentle, hands up for the camera. "Just making room." Webb came down the bar fast for a man his age. "That's enough," he said. "Trevor." Off the lady's stool. Kane turned, surprised, and then amused. "Relax, Silas. We're playing." "You're not playing," Webb said. "You just don't know it yet." But the old man had no rank here, no team, no weight. Only 19 years of beer and a chest full of names. And Kane waved him off the way the young wave off the old. Kindly, certainly, completely. He turned back to his audience. The bar's attention drifted on. Webb stood a moment with his jaw working, then retreated, because there was nothing else he could do until the man he had called arrived, and he prayed the man would hurry. If you have ever watched the young mistake quiet for weakness, stay with this one and subscribe to the Veteran Vault. The woman, for the first time, looked up from the mirror. She did not look at Kane. She looked past him, over his shoulder, at the door, a long, level, expectant look, the look of someone waiting for a guest. And Kane, seeing it, mistook it the way he had mistaken everything else about her. He thought she was looking for help. He thought she was afraid. He grinned, and he leaned in, and he decided the joke wasn't finished after all. "There's nobody coming for you, sweetheart," he said. "It's just us." The woman returned her eyes to him, unhurried, and something in their flat, gray patience should have warned him. It did not. He was 27, and the night was young, and he had never in his life met a thing he could not laugh at. Then the thing turned serious, the way it always does, in one bad step. "Take it off," Kane said. The friendliness was gone from his voice now. The pin had gotten under his skin, the not knowing of it, the way she wore the small, worn thing with the calm of a woman who had not bought it. He had decided, somewhere in the last 10 minutes, that she was a fraud, because a fraud was the only kind of person his world contained who would behave like this and turn out to be no one. "Take it off," he said again. "Right now. Before somebody who actually earned one walks in here and sees you wearing it. That's stolen valor. You understand me? People go to jail for that. So you take it off, you put it on the bar, and you walk out, and we forget your face." The woman did not move. He swept his hand across the bar and knocked her water glass spinning. It went off the edge and shattered on the floor, water and glass across the boards, and the bar went a half-tone quieter, the way a room does when an accident tips toward something else. She did not flinch. She did not look at the glass. Her hand stayed flat on the wood, and her eyes stayed on Kane, and the stillness of her in that moment was so complete that even Hoyt lowered his phone an inch. She sat with the stillness of a woman who has been shot at for 5 straight hours, and learned, somewhere in the 4th, that flinching changes nothing and costs everything. A young sailor near the back, a second class with a kinder face, shifted his weight and looked uneasy, and looked at the door, and looked at his beer, and did nothing. Nobody did anything. That is the truth of these rooms, the truth the woman had long ago made her peace with, that the crowd looks away, the decency is mostly silent, that the line is almost always crossed in front of witnesses who will later swear they meant to step in. "You don't even know what it is," Kane said. "Lower now," leaning so close she could smell the beer. "Say it. Say what it is if you earned it." And the woman said it, low, exact, and unbothered. She named the small, worn pin at her collar, and what it had cost, and what it stood for, in the flat, clean cadence of a person reading her own truth off a wall she has stood in front of 100 times. Kane heard the words and did not understand them, and so he heard them as a bluff. "Right," he said, and laughed, and straightened up, and looked around at his men. Okay. The Major's got jokes." He cracked his knuckles. He had decided, in the easy way of a man who has never once been wrong about a fight, that the bit needed a finish. "Tell you what, let's give the people a real show." He did not see Silas Webb plant both hands flat on the bar. "Trevor." Webb's voice came hard across the room, harder than the bar had ever heard it, and a few heads turned. "Son, you don't know who you are talking to. I am telling you that for free, and I am telling you once. Sit down, turn the camera off, and I'd stop while stopping. It's still free." For a moment, just a moment, the certainty in Kane's face wavered, not because he believed the old man, but because the old man clearly believed himself. Then he laughed it off. the way the young laugh off the warnings of the old, the way men have always laughed off the things that are about to teach them. "Silas," he said, "you've been pouring beer too long. You think everybody's a legend." He spread his arms to the room. "She's a contractor with a yard sale pin. Watch." But the room had half quieted now, and into the quiet, the woman's calm had begun to read as something other than fear. A few of the older hands at the back had stopped laughing. They could not have said why. They only felt the way a man feels when the barometer drops. A pressure, a wrongness, the sense of weather coming that the sky has not yet shown. Webb had finished his call. Whatever he had said into the worn old phone, he had said it fast and low. And then he had stood in the thin light by the kitchen door, with his hand pressed flat against the doorframe, steadying himself, the way a man steadies himself on the rail of a pitching deck. When he came back to the bar, his color was off, and his hands had a tremor that 19 years of pouring had never put in them. He knew now. He had not been certain before. A man does not let himself be certain about a thing like that, because the disappointment of being wrong is its own small grief. But he had described the pin and the stillness and the grip and the way she said the word trident to a man on the other end of the line who had gone quiet for 3 full seconds and then said a single word, a call sign, and asked Webb where the bar was and how fast the road ran. Webb had told him. And then Webb had hung up and understood that he was standing 6 feet from a legend he had assumed was dead, and that a boy in his bar was about to learn the most expensive lesson of his young life, and that there was nothing left for an old bartender to do but keep the door clear and pray the road ran fast. Webb turned to the younger bartender and said, low, "Keep the front door clear. Anybody comes in, you let them through." And the woman, hearing it, clocked the boy's movement toward the door with one flick of her eyes, the trained reflex of a person who needs to know, always, where the room is opening and where it is closing. What the boy with the phone did not know is what the next few minutes were about to teach him. Subscribe so you do not miss it. Headlights swept across the front windows then, wide and slow, a vehicle turning into the gravel lot and stopping. An engine cut. Webb let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for a long time. The woman did not turn around. She had already heard the engine over the noise of the bar, identified it, filed it. She knew the sound of that kind of vehicle, and she knew who would be driving it, because she had told him that afternoon exactly where she would be, and exactly when. She lifted her chin a fraction. Everything in her, the watcher Webb would say later, seemed to settle, the way a thing settles when the last variable resolves. Boots on gravel. More than one set. She kept her eyes on Kane, and she let him have his last few seconds of being the largest man in the room. To understand what walked into the holdfast that night, you have to leave the bar, and the boy with the phone, and the broken glass on the boards, and go back 12 years, and most of a world away, to a flat mud roof in a valley with no good name, on the worst night of Vivian Castellano's life. She had been 28 then, a lieutenant, and she had not yet been anyone the teams told stories about. She had gone up onto that roof alone because the roof was the highest thing on the objective, and somebody had to own the high ground, and the troop she was attached to, a SEAL assault element, hard men who had not been sure what to make of the quiet officer with the strange specialty, had gone into the compound below to take a man who turned out to have 100 friends. It went loud in 90 seconds. It stayed loud for 5 hours. She remembered the cold first, when she let herself remember it at all. People imagined those valleys as hot, and in the day they were, but the nights came down off the mountains like a blade, and she had lain on that mud roof in the dark, with the cold soaking up through her plates and her breath fogging in the green wash of the optic. And she had been grateful for the cold, because the cold kept her sharp, and sharp was the only thing she had to give. She remembered the smell of the place, wood smoke and animal, and turned earth, and after the first hour, the flat copper smell that comes into the air when men begin to bleed. She remembered the radio, warm against her cheek, the one warm thing in the whole Black Valley, and the discipline it took to keep her voice on it, level and slow when everything in her wanted to climb. She had been the highest thing on the objective, and so she had become the most dangerous thing on it. From the roof, she could see what the men in the courtyard could not. The muzzle flashes blooming in the windows across the alley, the fighters moving along the wall to flank, the truck nosing up the road with its lights off. She had a radio in one hand and the whole Black Valley laid out below her, and she did the thing she had trained her whole life to do, which was not to be brave, exactly, but to be still and clear in the one place where stillness and clarity were worth more than courage. She called the rounds. She talked the aircraft onto the trucks. She walked fire down the alley, a building at a time. She gave the men in the courtyard the corners they could not see and pulled them, foot by foot, off a piece of ground that had been chosen to kill them. The enemy learned, over those 5 hours, to fear a voice they could not place, a calm, level, unhurried woman's voice on a net they could not find, that seemed to know where they would be before they did. It was the men she saved who gave her the name. One of them, pinned and certain he would die, heard that voice put a wall of steel between him and the dark, and said into his own radio, to nobody, half a prayer. She's a widowmaker, that one. She's making widows out there tonight, just not ours. The name stuck the way true names do. She would have traded it. She had said so, once, to a board of officers who wanted to pin a medal to her chest, and they had not understood, and she had not tried to explain, because the only person who would have understood was dead. His name was Jonah Keller. He was a chief, 29, and before that night, he had been one of the men in the troop least sure of her. Not unkind, never unkind, but quietly skeptical of the quiet officer with the strange specialty, the way good operators are skeptical of anyone who has not yet been tested in front of them. He had said maybe 10 words to her in the staging area. She had not minded. She had learned long ago that respect in that world was not given and not asked for. It was only ever earned, once, in the dark, in front of witnesses, and usually at a price. He had come up onto the roof in the 4th hour because she was alone, and the flankers had found the stairs, and he had put himself between her and the door without being asked. He held the door. He held it long past, when holding it was survivable, because she was still talking on the radio, and the men below were still alive because of it. And Jonah Keller had decided, in the cold arithmetic that the best of them carry, that her voice was worth more than his body. It was the highest thing one of them could say to another, and he said it not with words, but with the whole of what was left of him, and she had understood it, and she had kept talking, because to stop would have made the trade he was making worthless. When the round found him, he did not cry out. He slid down the wall, and she caught him, and kept talking on the radio with one hand, while she pressed the other to the place in him that would not stop. And she carried him down 2 flights of broken stairs, with the net still in her ear, and the fight still on. And she could not save him, and she had known by the 2nd flight that she could not, and she had carried him anyway. "Stay with me, Chief," she had said. "We're almost off the X." And Jonah Keller, with the last clear thing in him, had looked up at the woman whose voice had saved an entire troop that night, and said, "Tell them it was a good roof." Then the helicopter, and the long flight, and the flag, folded into a hard triangle that she did not so much carry as become. The Navy Cross came later, and the call sign came with it, and she wore both the way you wear a wound that is healed wrong, present every day in every weather. She never set foot on another roof without thinking of him. She never heard a young man laugh easily in a safe room without loving him a little for not yet knowing, and grieving him a little for the night that would teach him. And she had carried Jonah Keller's name into every command she had ever held since, the way you carry a debt that cannot be paid, only honored. That was the woman sitting at the end of Silas Webb's bar, watching the door, while a boy named Kane decided to give the people a show. Kane reached for her. He did it the way he did everything, with total confidence and no thought at all. He closed his hand around her upper arm to haul her off the stool, to walk her to the door, to give the camera its ending. "Show's over," he said. "Out." What happened next, the men in the holdfast would describe differently for years, but they would all agree on the timing of it, which was no time at all. The woman did not pull away. She did not stiffen. She let him take her arm, and in the same instant her other hand came off the bar and closed around his wrist. It was not a fast motion. That was the part that stayed with them. It was not a strike or a twist or anything they had a name for. It was simply that her hand was suddenly around his wrist, and his hand could not move, and the harder he pulled, the more completely it could not move, as if his arm had been set into the wall of the building itself. There was no strain in her face. Her grip closed once, all the way, to a place past where a strong man's grip stops, and held there for 1 full second, long enough for Kane to understand, in the animal part of him that is older than confidence, that the woman could break the bones in his forearm the way a person snaps kindling, and was choosing, deliberately, not to. Then she let go. She set his wrist down, gently, the way you set down something that does not belong to you. And she looked at him with those flat, gray eyes, and she still did not raise her voice. "Don't," she said. Kane stepped back. He laughed, too loud, too quick, and shook his arm out and said something to the room about a grip on the old contractor, and the room laughed with him because the room needed to. But the laugh did not reach his eyes, and his eyes did not leave her, and a small, cold doubt had opened in him that all his certainty could not quite paper over. He had felt the strength in that hand. There was no story he could tell himself that explained it. The woman stood. She did it on her own terms, unhurried, smoothing her plain blue shirt. And she was not tall, and not broad, and not anything the men would have picked out of a crowd. And yet every man near her took a half-step back without deciding to. She had the floor now. She had taken it without a word. Silas Webb, at the door, went very still. The engine in the lot had cut out a full minute before. Now there were boots on the gravel, unhurried, heavy, certain. And the front door of the holdfast opened, and the noise of the bar fell off it like water off a hull. A big man filled the doorway. He wore civilian clothes, but they did not fool anyone, because some men cannot be made to look like anything but what they are. He was somewhere near 50, gray at the temples, with the chest and the bearing of a lifetime spent at the front of formations. He stopped 1 step inside the door. His eyes went across the room, the way a senior man's eyes always go across a room, sorting it, and they found the woman in the blue shirt standing at the end of the bar, and the big man stopped dead. The laughter died in Kane's throat for reasons he could not yet name. For a moment, nobody moved. The big man in the doorway looked at the woman, and the woman looked back at him, and something passed between them that the whole bar could feel, and only 2 people understood. Then the big man came across the room, and the men of the team parted for him without knowing why, because the part of them trained below thought recognized the way he walked. His name was Emmett Boyd, and he was the command master chief of the team, the senior enlisted man of every operator in that bar, including Trevor Kane, the most respected and most feared chief any of them had ever served under. They had never seen the look that was on his face now. It was not anger. It was something they had no category for. It looked almost like reverence, and on Emmett Boyd's face, reverence was a thing none of them had imagined could exist. He stopped 3 feet from the woman and came to attention, heels together, spine straight, in the middle of a dive bar in his civilian clothes. "Ma'am," he said. The bar was silent now. Every man in it was listening. "Widowmaker," Boyd said, and his voice was not loud, but it carried into every corner of the room. "I served on the troop you covered, the Valley. I was the second man off the X that you talked out of that courtyard. I've been trying to shake your hand for 12 years. He paused, and his jaw worked once. "We have been waiting on you all week, Mom. The whole team." The name landed in the room like a depth charge. It did not detonate at once. It sank, and then it went off, deep, where the men lived. Widowmaker. They knew it. Of course they knew it. Every one of them had heard the name in a classroom, in a bar, from an older man's mouth, the story of the lieutenant on the roof who held a net for 5 hours and walked a chief down 2 flights of stairs under fire. It was a story they told. It was a story they had half believed was made up, the way young men half believe all the old stories, until the legend was standing in a blue shirt at the end of the bar where they had just watched a boy knock her water on the floor. The old chief at the back, the one with the face like weathered teak, was the first to move. He set down the beer he had stopped drinking, and he came to his feet slowly, and he turned toward the woman in the blue shirt and held himself there, rigid, an old salt, who had heard the name as a young man and never thought to see the face that went with it. Beside him, a younger operator looked up, baffled, and the old chief said 2 words to him without turning his head. "That's her," and the younger man's mouth opened and closed, and he stood too. Hoyt's phone came down. He had stopped filming. His face had gone the color of paper. He was already, in some cold corner of himself, thinking about the footage on it, about who would see it, about the word "sweetheart" riding the same file as the moment a command master chief came to attention in a bar. And he was beginning to understand that he had recorded the worst night of his own life and Kane's, and that no amount of deleting would ever make it unhappened. And Trevor Kane stood very still as the bottom went out of his world. The door opened again. This time the man who entered wore the service dress blues of a United States Navy captain, 4 gold stripes bright on each sleeve, and the bar, what was left of its noise, fell completely away. He was tall and spare and silver-haired, and he carried the unmistakable weight of a man who commanded other commanders. His name was Gregory Thorne, and he was the Commodore of the Naval Special Warfare Group. And he had come, as senior officers sometimes do the night before a change of command, to find the officer taking over one of his teams and shake her hand before the ceremony made it formal. He saw her across the room. He stopped. And then Captain Gregory Thorne, who outranked every soul in that building, came to attention and raised his hand in a slow, deliberate salute and held it. "Commander Castellano," he said. The word commander moved through the team like a current. They looked at the woman in the blue shirt, the contractor, the major, the joke, and they understood, all at once and far too late, that they had spent the evening laughing at the officer who would take command of them at 1000 hours the next morning. "The team is yours tomorrow," Thorne said, his hand still up, his eyes steady on hers. "But the Navy Cross does not wait for a ceremony, and neither do I. Tonight, the honor is mine." A 4-stripe captain stood in the middle of a dive bar and held a salute for a woman a boy had tried to drag off a stool, and not one man in that room would ever forget the sight of it. Vivian Castellano returned the salute, once, cleanly, and let it fall. Then the team came to its feet. It was not ordered. No one called it. It moved through the room like a single body remembering itself. The older chiefs first, then the operators, then the young ones, then all of them. Chairs scraping, glasses set down. Every man in the holdfast standing at attention for the woman at the end of the bar. Silas Webb, behind the counter, stood straightest of all, an old frog-man's spine snapping to a line it had not held in 20 years, and there were tears standing in the corners of his eyes that he did not bother to hide. Trevor Kane's face cycled through it all in the space of a few seconds. Confusion first, a desperate, scrambling effort to make the pieces fit some other picture. Then disbelief as the pieces refused. Then recognition, cold and total, as he understood the small worn pin and the flat gray calm and the grip he could not break and the name every man in his team had just risen to honor. And then horror, plain and absolute, as he saw himself. Saw the boot on her stool, the knocked glass, the camera, the word sweetheart. Saw all of it the way the rest of the room had just learned to see it. He came to attention because his body did it without him. His hands shook. He could not look at her, and he could not look away. And Vivian Castellano, who had not raised her voice once the entire night, finally turned from the captain and the command master chief and the standing room, and looked at the boy who had tried to throw her out of the bar. The whole holdfast held its breath to see what she would do with him. She did almost nothing, and that was the part of it the men would tell their own young sailors about for the rest of their careers. Captain Thorne had already turned cold eyes on Kane. Command Master Chief Boyd had crossed to stand in front of him, and Boyd's voice, when it came, was the quiet, flat voice that frightens operators far more than any shout. "Petty Officer Kane." Boyd did not raise it. "You're done for the night. You will be in the team room at 0600. You will explain to your chief and to me exactly what I walked in on. And then you will explain it to your new commanding officer." He let that sit. "Pick up the glass you broke, on your knees, in front of everyone, like the man you want us to believe you are." Kane knelt and picked up the broken glass with shaking hands. The bar watched him do it in total silence. The bar that had laughed at her now would not look at Kane, and that was its own verdict, harsher in its way than anything the Master Chief could deliver. The men he had been performing for an hour ago had become strangers. They studied the floor and the bottles and the door, anywhere but the boy on his knees. And Kane felt the warmth of the pack close over and go cold. Felt himself moved, in a single evening, from the inside of it to the outside, to the place where the woman had sat all night without complaint. He understood, kneeling there with the glass cutting faint lines into his palms, exactly how much she had absorbed, and exactly how little it had cost her to absorb it. And the understanding was worse than any punishment, because it showed him the size of the thing he had failed to see. When the worst of it had been said, and the threat of real consequence hung heavy and certain over the boy's bowed head, it was the commander who waved it off. "Master Chief," Castellano said, "that's enough." Boyd turned. "Ma'am, he's a young operator." She looked at Kane, kneeling, the pieces of the glass in his hands, and there was no triumph in her face, and no anger either, only the level gray patience that had carried a troop off a roof. "He's good at his job, or he wouldn't be in your team. He just hasn't met the part of it that costs yet." She paused. "Take the swagger. Don't take the trident. Let him learn it standing up, the way the rest of us had to. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Subscribe to the veteran vault, and let this story find the people who need it." The captain left first, and then the team, quietly, the way men leave a church. A few of them paused near her on the way out, not to speak, most of them, only to come briefly to attention. A nod, a hand laid flat over the heart, the small private salutes that men give when the formal ones are over. The old chief with the weathered face stopped longest. He did not offer his hand. He only looked at her for a moment with eyes that had carried the story for 30 years and said, "Lo, I tell the young ones about the roof, ma'am. I've told it for years. I never thought I'd get to tell it to your face." And she said, "Then you've kept him alive better than the medal did." And the old man's jaw tightened, and he went out into the dark. Boyd was the last to go. He stopped in front of her, and this time he did not salute. He simply put out his hand, and she took it. And the two of them stood there a moment, the lieutenant from the roof and the second man off the X, 12 years and a dead chief between them, and neither said anything because there was nothing that needed saying. 3 weeks later, on a gray morning with the wind off the water, Commander Vivian Castellano walked the rows of a Naval Special Warfare memorial with Trevor Kane, a careful pace behind her. She had not made him come. She had told him where she would be, the way she had once told a captain where she would be, and she had let him decide. He had decided. He looked older than he had in the bar, which is what consequence does to the young when it is delivered with mercy instead of cruelty. It ages them in the right direction. She stopped at a name cut into the dark stone. She did not have to search for it. She knew exactly where it was, the way she knew where the exits were in any room, the way she knew the sound of that engine in a gravel lot. Jonah R. Keller. "His name is Keller," she said. She took Kane's hand, the wrist she had held in the bar, and pressed his open palm flat against the carved letters and held it there. He was a chief. He was 29. He held a door on a roof so I could keep a net up, and he died doing it. And I carried him down 2 flights of stairs, and I could not save him. Her voice did not change. It never changed. "The call sign you laughed at in that bar isn't mine. Not really. It's his. It belongs to every man on that roof who didn't come home, and everyone who did, because somebody else didn't." She let go of his hand, but his palm stayed against the stone. "Earn it before you laugh at the next quiet one at the bar. There's always a next quiet one, and you will almost never know what they carried." Trevor Kane stood with his hand against the name of a man he had never met and would now never forget, and the wind came off the water, and he wept, quietly, the way the old ones taught, and Vivian Castellano let him, and that was its own kind of forgiveness. She left him there with the name a while. Some warriors fade quietly into the years, but the valor never leaves them. Honor the ones who carry it in silence. Thank you for staying and watching. Subscribe to the Veteran Vault for more.